The 100-Line Last Defense Academy was a game that I was honestly kinda iffy on when I first heard about it. It had been lurking around as one of 2Kyo's promised first original IPs as a new studio for a while, but my first real exposure to it was the June 2024 Nintendo Direct where it was properly announced. And to be super blunt, my first reaction was kinda just like, Kodaka, if you want to make Danganronpa 4 that bad, I am sure Spike Chunsoft would be down. The art, the music, the character designs, the premise, all of it just screams Danganronpa. And that's not surprising, given that this was the first big original IP from 2Kyo Games, a studio founded by Zero Escape and I, the Somnium Files writer Kotaro Uchikoshi, alongside three of the pillars of Danganronpa. Series writer Kazutaka Kodaka, series composer Masafumi Takada, and series character designer Ruika Matsuzaki. I mean, technically not the first, since Master Detective Archives Raincode came out first, but they all insist on kind of forgetting that one and framing this one as the first. Presumably because MDA was done with Spike Chunsoft's involvement. Anyways, the announcement for the 100 line left me a little bit skeptical. I mean, I was going to get it regardless because at this point I'm in for a penny in for a pound with these people, but I had low expectations. I was sure it'd be fun, don't get me wrong, but after Raincode in 2023 was the most, perfectly neutrally acceptable game ever made, I figured it wouldn't really be that much more than that. They were promising a lot of content. 100 routes is insane behavior, and given the size of the studio, I didn't really know if they could follow through. Plus, like I said, this fruit looks familiar. 15 students trapped in a school by a mysterious mascot character is not a new premise in general, and certainly not for these writers. Although this time, there wasn't supposed to be a killing game. Instead, the characters would be fighting off these bizarre, adorable monsters to defend the school that's being attacked for some reason, I guess. It kind of felt like one of those announcements you used to get at the end of E3 where it's like, holy shit, look at how big of a game they're promising. This looks so exciting. And then you never hear about it literally ever again. Nowadays, we reserve that slot in culture for the most generic multiplayer game that Jeff Keighley inexplicably wants to serve up on a silver platter for the gaming community to rip to shreds for looking uninspiring at the end of the Game Awards. And honestly, I think that's a little bit more of a fun tradition for everyone who isn't behind the scenes at Highguard. But then I just kept seeing Kodaka talking about this game online. Actually, talking is a little bit too gentle of a word for his social media presence over the 10 months between the announcement at the Nintendo Direct and the game's launch. Plus, honestly, the month or so post-launch as well. What he was really doing was a slow-motion crash-out where you could tell that he was trying to maintain his composure while spiraling about this game because they had put everything into it. 2Kyo had bet the house, the car, the cat, the dog, all of it on this shit. They'd taken out loans and they'd invested a lot of their own personal resources into it as well. And if this game didn't work out, it sounded like they were likely going to have to end 2Kyo. For almost an entire year, I just saw Kodaka hyping up this game with the desperation of a man who really knows and believes that he's got something good and just needs people to take a chance on it, to get in front of it. And even though the materials themselves didn't really have me excited, I was getting more and more convinced because of his excitement. Obviously, games aren't just made by one man, or even the four men who founded the studio, but a game being led by Uchikoshi and Kodaka was kind of inherently interesting by itself. And I also remembered that they weren't like this when Raincode was coming. Maybe it really would be something special. I started playing this game when it came out on April 24th, 2025, and if I can be super duper honest with you, chat, I low-key wasn't feeling it at the start. Sure, the art and the sound design were undeniably great, but that feeling I had from June 2024 still hadn't gone away. Could this game really live up to its promise? Could it have the scope that 2Kyo insisted it would? And if we're being really honest here, would I even want to explore that scope with these characters? So many of them were immediately off-putting, from Ima and Kako inducing an eye roll over Kodaka once again having some bullshit pseudo-incest stuff going on, to Shoma being insufferably self-deprecating, to Tsubasa being a thinly veiled excuse for Kodaka to just have someone puking constantly, to Gaku being a deeply unpleasant combination of wimpy, bratty, and creepy, to Sirei being definitely not Monokuma, we promise. The only one that kind of worked for me right out of the gate was Edo, but I was of a mind of one character in a roster this big isn't really enough for this to be a particularly enjoyable experience, is it? Viewer, let me tell you, I have never been so happy to eat my words.
Remember. Remember what you must do. Remember what you must protect.
What I must do? The Last Defense Academy. All of my friends. Karuha. I have to protect them!
The 100-line Last Defense Academy is all they promised it would be and more. Out of that initial trepidation around the cast grew this intense love for all of them and their weirdness, and the premise grew on me more and more and more as each in-game day passed. I don't know how far I was into the game by the time I knew this would be one of my favorites of the year, but it definitely was not very far. However, I do know the moment where I realized this went beyond just being one of my favorite games of 2025, or even my straight up game of the year. One particular moment right near the end of my playthrough that had me so emotionally invested that I was fully crying through the final credits, and where, in spite of only getting 4 of the game's 100 endings, I decided my time with the game was done for now. Someday I'll go back and play more for sure, especially if we get DLC with even more routes, which is seeming pretty likely right now, but I don't know, man. The story felt so complete to me in that moment that I just needed to leave it there for a bit and digest it, you know? One of the excellent things about this game is that given its colossal size and the huge amount of branching paths, no two people will have the same experience with it. Out of all of my friends, I think I'm the only one who got the endings I got, or at least in the order that I got them. But this is the problem, dear viewer. I can't tell you what that moment was. I can't really tell you what any of those moments were. The 100 line is the epitome of the, dude, you just have to trust me, I promise it's good genre of games. The ones where everything that make it great would ruin the experience for someone to gush over in front of you when you haven't played it yet. And every game is kind of like that to some extent, because inevitably the game's climax will almost always be a make or break moment, you know? It's the climax of the story, it kind of matters, but a lot of games don't need to worry about spoiling that in order to make a convincing pitch. I can pitch Danganronpa or Zero Escape or The Somnium Files or Ace Attorney or any number of other games to you in a way that gets the point across without spoiling it and makes it an appealing prospect, but the 100 line Last Defense Academy is so dense and so weird and so convoluted in how it handles its characters, premise, and plot that it would necessitate spoiling a lot of things to truly explain why I love it so much. This video will avoid spoiling as much as possible, and will certainly not be spoiling that moment of mine, but if you have not played this game before, I'm going to urge you to avoid the comments because that space will not be spoiler free. I will ask people who've played before to generally try to not give away too much, use route numbers and be vague where possible, but I'm assuming with a title like this I'll end up with a lot of commenters who also want to gush about this game, and I wouldn't want to take that away from them either. For those who have played it, the endings I got were, in order, 6, 5, 2, and 1. Make of that what you will. Normally for my videos, especially about visual novels, I tend to break them up into numbered chapters, but honestly, the 100 line isn't really conducive to that. This is an insanely difficult game to figure out how to talk about because where on earth do you even start? How on earth do you possibly make a concise video about the game that is potentially the single largest writing project in the medium with 100 different endings? There are things that are teased in the first week or so in-game, like the moment that Takumi looks up at the moon and it kind of censors something that you do not get an answer to for days. Not in-game days, to be clear, real-world days of playing it. 24-hour full days. How do I do anything with that? How do I talk about that without ruining it? You kind of have to have that experience. It took me 6 hours to talk about Danganronpa V3, and that game takes place over the span of I think 3 weeks tops. The 100 line is 100 days to start with. Cumulatively, it is potentially the game with the highest word count ever made. If not in the number 1 spot, depending on the language, it's certainly close. But it's also the least linear game ever made. There's no way to do a plot summary video with it, and even if I wanted to do that, I don't think it would capture what was special about it. Honestly, part of what makes it so special to me in particular is that it feels a little bit tailor-made to be a response to the worst game I've ever played. Inescapable, no rules, no rescue. I apologize for beating this dead horse. I know it's been 2 years. I can't stop myself and I'm very sorry. If you haven't heard about it though, either from me or from having made the mistake of playing it yourself, that game takes place over the span of 180 days, where your first 60 days determines which of the game's 4 routes you'll end up on. One of the big reasons I had reservations about the 100 line is that Inescapable had fumbled so goddamn hard with something relatively similar in concept, and I was worried that even with the talents behind it being significantly more talented, the scope of it would just be too much. But yet again, I could not have been happier to be wrong here. The 100 line proves that this sort of thing is doable with the right talent and investment and commitment, and you could really feel it in every aspect of the experience. In Inescapable, there was only one relatively good ending that still sucked pretty hard, and if you got any of the other 3, all of which were much easier to get, you had an objectively worse experience that felt incomplete and shitty. The 100 line isn't like that though, and my favorite example is that when it finally came time to start making some true decisions in the game, me and my friend Papo Losfeld picked very differently. I'm not going to spoil it, either in terms of what my decision was or what the decision is in general, because even implying what that first decision is about would reveal way too much about the game that you weren't supposed to learn until at least 40 hours in. But people who know the game and have been listening to what I've been saying will be able to guess what my choice was. Like I said, Papo picked differently, because he is a monster. From that point on, we played entirely different games. Characters I lost in the first couple of weeks made it to the very end with him. Characters he hated went through entirely different arcs for me, growing and changing in ways that made me love them even more. I think he got to experience a killing game at some point, which I never did. Like, it was a pretty sharp tonal shift for the both of us. There are comedy routes, there are horror routes, combat-focused routes, routes where your character Takumi ends up leading a cult, ones where he ends up in a polycule, ones where I think he ends up fighting off zombies, but I'm not entirely certain what's going on there, and so much more on top of all that. And like I said, you have to play about 40 hours before you can even start going down those paths. And while that might sound tedious, the experience of it honestly really isn't. A game this long managing to still ultimately be a pretty tight story, at least in most of its endings, is really a feat in and of itself, especially given that it's telling that story across, like I said, 100 different branching paths, and it tells some very good stories with its routes. That's not to say there aren't some plot contrivances or plot holes or weak points in the narrative at times. It would be functionally impossible not to have a few bits where you just have to take the leap of faith and trust there'll be solid ground to land on. But by and large, it really does nail it. According to Steam achievements, out of the number of people who've started this game, 2/3 have made it to day 100 at least one time. For a game with this kind of runtime, that's already insanely impressive. 2/3 of all of the people who picked up this game were willing to put in the 40-odd hours it takes to get just that far. And what's more, a majority of them managed to do it a second time. 33.7% of all 100-line players got to ending 1 like I did, which by itself is a very slim majority of the people who got to day 100, the first time at least. But again, that's only one route. The 100 Lines achievements group all the endings in a single route together, and while Route 1 only contains ending 1 and Route 2 only contains ending 2, most routes have multiple endings before it triggers the achievement. Like I said, Route 1 has a roughly 34% completion rate, but it's not the only route. Route 12 is around 29%, Route 2 is 28%, Route 3 is 24%, 18 is 23%, Routes 4, 14, 6, 20, and 13 are all 22%, Route 5 is 21%, and Routes 17 and 15 are 20%, at least as of time of recording. That's 13 routes that at least 1/5 of all players who launched this game have completed. And there's still more. Routes 8 and 9 are at 19%, Routes 11 and 19 are at 17%, Route 7 is at 16%, Route 10 is at 15%, and Routes 21 and 16 are at 13%. And obviously it's not like everyone only got one of these. Add up those numbers and you get 438%, which is not correct. 438% of people who picked up this game did not in fact get an ending. And since only 66% of people even got far enough to unlock the option to get any of these, that means that the average 100-line player seemingly completed it around 6 or 7 different routes. That's a lot for a game this big. By contrast, Baldur's Gate 3's Steam page shows that only about 23% of players got to the ending of that game. And that's not to knock Baldur's Gate either. I really liked it. It was great. That is a very long game that you can get a lot out of without getting to the formal ending of it. But I think it puts into context just how many people are getting hooked for dozens and dozens of hours by this game and feel compelled to see what all it has to offer. But again, the problem is that arguably even telling you about the number of routes and the diversity of narratives within them is kind of a spoiler. The only reason I feel like I can tell you that stuff is that the game itself advertises the 100 endings pretty aggressively, so stuff like that feels like fair game. Same goes for a handful of characters you don't meet until a little ways into the game, like Nozomi, Moko, Yigamu, Kyoshika, and Karara. While it's technically a spoiler that they exist, I guess, if you're going in completely blind, the game's advertising shows them in the marketing and describes them on the website, so I don't know, I think that's okay? But even then, how much can I tell you about any of them? So much of their character arcs are things that would lose their punch if I told you about them up front. When I've done previous videos like this for Buried Stars or Your Turn to Die or Danganronpa or whatever, I would usually go, character by character to be like, this is so-and-so, this is their deal at the start, this is what's good or bad about them, we'll leave the rest of it until later. But in 100 Line, the game gives you basically nothing to work with at the start. Hell, once you start getting into the defensive battles, only 4 characters, Takumi, Hiroko, Darumi, and Takamaru, are even willing to participate. Most of the roster straight up refuses to fight. And it's not a sit-out that ends anytime soon either. A significant portion of your first playthrough is spent trying and failing to get them just to participate. I can't even confirm or deny if all 15 characters actually end up fighting because even that feels like a spoiler. So how do I tell you why this game is my game of the year? Or my favorite game, full stop? Because it unquestionably is. I am pretty confident in saying it's the best game I've ever played. It genuinely does piss me off how bad it got snubbed in the awards season, especially because Expedition 33, a game that does the same type of thing that 100 Line does, but just kind of less, and even released on the same fucking day, swept everything. 100 Line barely even got nominations anywhere. And if we're being really bold and brave and honest here, if this game swapped aesthetics with Expedition 33, we would have seen it clean the fuck up. But that's not really the point. The point is that I think this is an amazing game, but I can't tell you much about the story, and I can't tell you much about the gameplay, and I can't tell you much about the premise, because so much of it is shrouded in mystery for days, weeks, or even months in game. 100 Line, no matter what you might say about it, is really truly not a front-loaded game. You will have to extract the narrative from this game sentence by sentence against the will of the game's mascot, Sire, who is holding every bit of exposition and information as close to his chest as possible. And what's more, it's not really a linear experience. And if I make the pitch based on my specific experiences, when you've got literally a 1% chance of getting the same first ending I did, much less the subsequent ones, I feel like I'm not really making an honest pitch. Even when it just comes to describing the characters I like, it's so limited because functionally every single character is kind of a slow burn. They're all off-putting at best and kind of repulsive at worst when you first meet them, whether it's, the big obnoxious personalities like Darumi and Hiroko, or the more low-key ones like Ima and Kako. And in a lot of cases, it takes a lot of hours to find the things you love about them. It is worth it, don't get me wrong, but I can't tell you how I came around on characters like Tsubasa or Gaku or Shoma without discussing things about them that you wouldn't learn about until 20 hours in. For 10 of these characters, their most important moments didn't even show up until I started getting close to some of those endings I mentioned earlier. And I feel like if I told you about them, I'd rob you of that experience. Not just from a spoiler perspective either. It's not just about, the basic facts of knowing X, Y, and Z happen. It would rob you of the experience of meeting, learning about, and growing with them over time, and of the surprise of the existence of characters that might never have even been mentioned in any promotional materials or the official website or merchandise or whatever else, or only show up in the main menu loading screen thing and then no excuses given or explanation given for why they're there. It would give you something concrete to hold on to. The idea that this character or that character will eventually show up or redeem themselves or change for the better or change for the worse in one route or another, that sort of thing can change how you interact with them in another route, and I don't want to do that to people. There is no definitive way to experience these characters because they are fundamentally not really static characters. At least not for the audience. They're generally consistent across narratives for themselves, but we don't experience them that way. The dozens of hours spent with Takumi, Edo, Darumi, Takamaru, Hiroko, Ima, Kako, Shoma, Tsubasa, Yugamu, Moko, Nozomi, and Karada are genuinely what defines your relationship to them. And also Sire. Very important to mention how much time we spend with the mascot. But every little moment with Edo either rubs you the wrong way and pisses you off even more about him, or warms you up to him just a little bit more. Every little hint behind the curtain of Darumi's manic behavior either annoys you or makes you want to know more about her. Every weird interaction between Ima and Kako either makes you wonder what happened to the two of them, or makes you roll your eyes at this weird kind of implied incest thing it feels like the game is doing. And all of this stems from the game's method of conception. According to Kodaka, the way it went was that he wrote one scenario from start to finish, determined a point where the narrative would end, went to Uchikoshi, and said, we need to do 99 more endings to this story. And not just bullshit endings, they all had to be equally valid, equally viable, equally canonical endings to this sprawling, insane story. To the extent that, while there is one ending that definitively is the first one written, it isn't the most true or correct one. Or at least not objectively. You can probably guess from the fact that the endings I got were 6, 5, 2, and 1 that I ended up with what the community generally assumes is the first truest ending. But literally right up until the very end, there are divergent points for the narrative where you can still find more equally acceptable endpoints. The entire story can change on a dime with a simple binary decision to tell a whole different story with different themes and ideas. Routes 1 and 2, or endings 1 and 2, involve making the same 13 decisions in a row across dozens of hours of gameplay, only to split at the very end. And while you might assume that a divergent point at the very end of the narrative surely couldn't change that much, it really, really does. The reason I stopped at 1 wasn't because it felt like it was the most true, or the most real, or the most valid, so I just didn't need to experience any more of it. It was just, to me, the point where I felt like I needed to put it down and digest everything that had happened. It wasn't because the previous endings weren't sufficiently satisfying, because they were. It's because, for reasons that'll probably only make sense to people who've gotten that ending and also know how attached I was to Danganronpa V3, it just hit the nail on the head in such a perfect way. It felt like the culmination of my relationship with these writers and developers and games and studios in a way that was, just kind of perfect. So I wanted to let it sit there for a bit. Eventually I'll go back and I'll find more, but I can't really overstate how perfect that moment felt. But again, I can't explain it either. I can't tell you what made it so perfect. I don't even really think I can allude to it. The V3 mention is probably already saying too much, although I don't think you could possibly predict where that one's going if you haven't already played it. That's what's so infuriating about this game. Maybe its single biggest flaw is that almost every single aspect of what makes it brilliant is something the player needs to uncover and experience for themselves firsthand. It's not a game that's just for people who like certain genres or games or themes. Like, it has a lot to offer everyone. The characters are, frankly, so much better than they have any right to be, especially given how they start. The story is way more satisfying and coherent than should even be possible with how much it branches, and the payoff is so much more than anyone would expect from a game that starts off with such a goofy premise. It drives me insane that I can't tell you about all my favorite moments on all my favorite days, the little Easter eggs and hints and references to past games and other pieces of media, that come up throughout, the unhinged visual novels that Darumi name drops just because Kodaka and Uchikoshi want to let you know what sorts of games have inspired them, or even just any of my favorite little quotes. And it's really a shame because there are so many brilliant performances in this game that I wish I could show you. The voice actors, artists, musicians, writers, everyone was putting on a show-stopping performance for this one, and I wish I could give you a clip show of the best ones. I wish that the 100 Line was a game that was conducive to being shown off in the way that it deserves to be. There's really only been one other time where I've tried to cash in on my social capital with my audience before this video. To try and play Buried Stars, a small game that I really loved where I begged my audience to take the plunge and experience it even if it was a bit outside of their comfort zone or something a bit outside of what they normally play. And one of the most rewarding moments in my entire time as a content creator was when I saw the viewer retention for that video plummet immediately after the part where I said, if you haven't played this game yet, pause this video here, go play it up to the first ending, and then come back. Because people actually did it. I got a ton of comments from people saying they bit the bullet and gave it a shot and were surprised by how much they enjoyed it. It was so rewarding to not only feel like I'd helped a lot of other people find a new game that they really liked, but also help that game get a little bit further out there into the world, get the success it deserved. This will be the second time I try and cash in. I have avoided spoilers as much as possible. I've avoided giving the game away. I have avoided doing anything that could realistically influence your decisions or perception of the game beyond, hopefully, making you feel like it's worth it to give it a try and keep going, even if it might start a bit slow. I would not recommend this game if I thought it wasn't worth it. In fact, it is arguably the only game that I unquestionably think is worth whatever price they're asking for it. If you can get it on sale, it is a bargain at any discount. I bought it at full price, and I considered that a fucking steal. Like, I want to go and buy the enhanced or special version or whatever it is too. And I think that if you buy it at full price too, you'll also feel like you got your money's worth. And I am saying this with the full knowledge of how obscenely expansive this game is. Like, what I'm recommending to you is something that, if you do choose to play it, will likely be a significant part of your media diet for at least a month or two. It is worth it. You will almost certainly never in your life play anything else like it. The 100 Line Last Defense Academy is a singular achievement in creative expression in the medium of video games. And I think if you're a fan of the medium, getting to experience a game that pushes the boundaries of what kind of narratives games can tell makes it worth it in and of itself. Like, I don't care if you're the kind of person who always turn their nose up at Danganronpa or thinks the only RPGs ever made are Final Fantasy VII, Skyrim, Persona 5 Royale, and Expedition 33, or who is the epitome of the ball and gun gamer. You should give it a try. The people behind this game have spent decades learning and improving and growing as artists, storytellers, world builders, musicians, and basically logistical engineers in this medium. And they put everything they had into it emotionally, financially, psychologically, everything. And in the words of Kodaka himself, many game companies and creators have started openly talking about their use of AI. At this rate, 100 Line might truly become the last grand 200-hour game story in human history written entirely without AI. In an era where so many publishers and studios are forgoing human creativity in favor of cheap, shoddy AI shortcuts, Tokyo took the path less traveled and poured their blood, sweat, and tears into something singularly huge and unwieldy in scope. The kind of project that AI proponents keep insisting would only be possible with AI. The 100 Line Last Defense Academy is my game of the year for 2025. It's also probably, not even probably, it is the best game I've ever played. It drives me insane that I can't tell you specifically why I came to feel that way over the course of the game, to make the clear-cut arguments for it that it deserves, to pitch these characters to you as the three-dimensional emotional landmines that they often are, to discuss the themes of war and peace and abuse and neglect and exploitation and environmentalism and mental illness and xenophobia and colonialism and so much more that this game is invoking and exploring. But I think it also deserves to be experienced organically by people who don't realize quite what they're in for. People who need to rub against those rough edges of these characters and run into the walls the story puts up and explore the world that's been built so that they can, for themselves, learn what it means for this medium to be art via one of its most indisputably artistic entries. It might not be your game of the year even after you play it, because, personal tastes will inevitably influence things, and I recognize this isn't everyone's cup of tea generally, but I do think it is impossible to play through the 100 Line Last Defense Academy and not come away deeply affected by not just the story, but the monument to human creativity and storytelling that it represents. I'll leave you with one clip from one ending of the game. I Do not know the number of this ending, I don't know the route name, I don't have the faintest clue how you get there or what happened in the preceding moments here. It's not what made me love the game or anything, but I do think it's maybe the only vaguely spoiler-adjacent moment I can show you from beyond the first 15-20 minutes of the game that will unquestionably make you more curious about what the fuck exactly is going on in this game. Please enjoy, without any remotely helpful context, a clip from YouTube titled "Takumi snarks at his friends, explodes, and then dies."
Oh my god! Shut up already! Why do I have to be surrounded by a bunch of clowns? What is this, the circus? Did you all arrive here in the same tiny car?
And that's where we're going to end this one. I hope you've enjoyed, and if you did, or didn't, I guess, I'm not your supervisor, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. This video was chosen by my community in a massive poll from November 2025 where everyone was allowed to vote for one of about 28 different topics to be made. And if you're curious about how I maybe use different voting systems to try and manipulate outcomes and how politicians can do the same thing to you, keep an eye out for the bonus video that's coming out tomorrow. Also starting tomorrow is the March Members' Choice Poll. Each month, my channel members pay $5 or more a month to support me, and in return, they not only get thanked at the end of each video, but they also get to vote for one topic per month. The topics are: why social skills matter in competitions. This video would explore how social skills work as both offensive and defensive tools in competitive environments, and why that's important. Why realistic graphics are never quite right. This video would be about the problem with realistic graphics, both in terms of why it's a boring artistic decision, as well as why it's always just a little bit wrong. The relatability of flopping. This video would explore how a flop era isn't always the worst thing in the world, how it humanizes people we sometimes see as these larger-than-life figures, and reminds us that they are still human. Mizuki's a good character you people just can't read. This video would be a defense of Mizuki Kawano from an audience of Overwatch players who seem determined to mischaracterize and misunderstand him at every turn, and would explore the difference between a badly written character versus a character you just don't like. The poll will start at midnight Mountain Time tonight and run until midnight on March 10th, and all members can vote directly themselves. And the community at large can vote in the Horde vote as well. We're almost finally caught up on all of these members' choice videos. The February one will be coming out on the 15th, and I'm hoping that the March one will be out by either the end of March or maybe early April. Lastly, thank you very much to all my channel members. At the $25 Elite membership tier, thank you to Adele, Robot Juice, and Bingo Banga. At the $10 Premium membership tier, thank you to Tortoise, and Tenar, Cavi Corbin, Corey Anders, NJD, and Mooney. At the $5 channel membership tier, thank you to Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Alex Stone, Destiny, Cadence, Marsh Alice, Gavas, Crimson Cyclo, CatLover192, Corey, MV, The Only Enigma, Mariah, Meep Cube, Noisy Pitta, Harv, Marcy Gaskill, Deku _ Safan, Lala the Bambi, Teo Tamara, Alinea, Caffeine Jelly, Aiden S, Ismi, 1000 Dumplings, Nilos, Lily Hero, Mitzicore, Bubble Boy, Shy J, and Brian. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or decided to click on this video out of curiosity, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.